Hey everyone, welcome back to the Lookout. Today's July 3rd. Today kind of feels like the first real day of fire season in Northern California. It's really busy. It might just seem that way because I listened to the radio all day and there was a lot going on. But yeah, we've got some fires going on. All the kind of turbulent weather we've had this week around NorCal has started some fires. We've got kind of a fairly typical pattern going on here of, that we get a storm that moves through and brings some lightning, and then things kind of get fairly settled. So even though we've had some fires get started, there haven't been huge winds kind of on these new fires, which is why you see that after 2 days of burning, a fire might be, 200 acres at the most, or 100 acres. When you see something like that, when you see a fire that grows less than 1,000 acres a day or something, oftentimes it tells you that the conditions aren't peak explosive action. Like when we see that the car fire could burn like 40,000 acres in a day or more, that tells you something about the extreme levels of dryness and wind and everything else. So we've got some fires going right now. None of them are really going crazy. They're kind of making runs that are based on opportunities that the terrain and fuel present to them. So we're going to kind of give you an overview of the fires. We're going to talk a bit about the weather, and we're going to look. There's one fire that really is stomping right now, and that's the Madre fire. So we'll go through each fire quickly, cover the basics of them, and then we'll get a little more in depth. Want to thank our sponsors. We got QTAC, based here in Chico, California. Build really nice pumps. Water Axe, they build the pumps that goes on QTAC's cool fire engines, and then Firebox builds these great attachments for skid steers that are great for all that. They're great for firefighting, great for prescribed fire, great for dust control and construction. So I'm really glad to have Firebox, Water Axe, and QTAC sponsoring us. All right, so let's jump into the map. Okay, so looking at Northern California, most of the action we've got right now is north of Redding. Almost all of it is north of Redding. There's been a couple small fires in Nevada County and other places where they get put out really quickly. So we're going to kind of take you through them. We've got the Green Fire, which is burning kind of near Round Mountain. So if you take 299 out, west of Redding up by Montgomery Creek, the Green Fire is burning out here on the near the Pitt River, kind of south of Fender's Ferry Road. It's about 100 acres. You've got the Horse Fire that we talked about last night. The Horse Fire is burning mainly in logging slash and a clear cut that was clear cut after salvage logging. That fire is about 220 acres. Got the Helena Fire over here near the town of Helena, near the North Fork of the Trinity River. That fire is burning on the south side of the Trinity River. It hasn't grown a lot, but it's in a really kind of difficult terrain. Got the Mosquito Fire that just kind of got spotted this afternoon. That's up kind of between Callahan and Coffee Creek. And don't worry, I'll zoom in on each one, but I just want to give the big picture. I got the Jacket Fire, which was also just discovered today. That fire, they initially called it in as about 50 acres, but then they mapped it and it was closer to 20. And then the Summit Fire, which we covered yesterday, which is burning kind of north of Etna, northwest of Etna, in the middle of nowhere in the Marble Mountains. Here's wilderness areas. So the Helena Fire is burning right on the edge of the Trinity Alps Wilderness. Summit Fire is burning in the Marble Mountain Wilderness. Jacket Fire is outside the wilderness. The other fires are just kind of in the general forest. As far as Southern California, the main fire we're going to cover there is the Madre fire. Madre is really romping and stomping. Yesterday it burned 35,000 acres in the first 8 hours or something. So none of these fires right now are going crazy. None of them, a couple of them have some potential to stick around for a few days. And we'll talk about those. I just want to jump out real quick and look at show you where the Madre fire is, and then we'll get a little more in depth. Yeah, so flying south, and the blue on this map is recent fires in the last 5 years, and Madre here is in red. Okay, so kind of bigger picture for where the Madre is. We've got Santa Maria out here on the coast. This is San Luis Obispo County, and then over here you've got I-5 and Buttonwillow and Bakersfield, and then if you go a bit farther north, you've got like Kettleman City. Up here on the 5. So this fire is burning, kind of started in Carrizo Canyon along Highway 166, and yesterday it ran about 35,000 acres. Now it's up to, I think, closer to, got mapped today at 3:30 at about 53,000 acres. So this fire isn't moving very aggressively to the north or west. It's kind of being driven by generally kind of a northwest wind, and so it's blowing generally to the kind of southeast. The fire is really unlikely that the fire is going to cross Highway 166. They fired along 166, and I think we can turn on. If you look at these perimeters as it's been mapped, when you see that a perimeter doesn't change, so like here's the current perimeter out here, and then the green. We see areas where there's a green line on the edge. Basically, that means that the fire hasn't spread past that green line in the previous like 8 hours. So it looks like the whole kind of northwest side of the fire hasn't moved, and then it hasn't crossed 166. And this section along here too, on the Cuyama Highway, hasn't been a lot of spread there. Often what we see on these big fires is just due to the size of the fire and the resources that are available. Big firing operations are what control fires like this. So this fire was active kind of out towards the Chimeneas Ranch today. And then you can see out here firing operations like this may have been kind of still active when it was flowing. But you can see based on these kind of square lines that they fired off the roads, and probably likely had, kind of like initial or mobile attack out through here. So we'll see when the next perimeter comes. But when you see these big kind of linear edges, it means that fire crews fired off those roads, and that this fire is likely done going this way. And even if it wasn't done going that way with the firing, it's going to hit this dry lake, so the lake out here. And so that's likely, I think it's likely that this whole side of the fire is pretty much going to be pretty controlled within a couple days. Really what we have is kind of a big box here defined by these valleys, and it seems fairly unlikely to me that it's going to push out this way. There has been quite a bit of competition for aircraft today because there's a lot of fires in NorCal. But we'll keep watching this, and we'll look at the webcams here in a minute. Basically, the fire's burning aggressively when it's in these kind of heavy oak and chamise kind of fuels. And so where you see the column building, that's because it's got heavy hardwood fuels to burn. In the grass, you're not going to see a column. You're just going to see a lot of kind of brown smoke. All right, so that kind of wraps up our overview of where all the fires are. Now we're going to kind of go back to NorCal and start working our way through this. As far as the big picture down here, it's still quite a ways from Cuyama Ranch and New Cuyama down here. And I'd expect tonight that we're going to see, now that they've got a lot of resources musters, we're going to see some big firing operations likely where they'll have dozer line and roads that they'll fire off of when the winds are favorable and kind of try to tie up. The hard parts here are like, what do you do out in this country where you don't have access and you've got heavy fuels? If you're an operations type person, you back off and you look at where you've got roads through this country and look at what you could do to create a firing operation off of major roads. Kind of, we call it building the box. So one resource that I like for this kind of stuff of kind of looking at where you'd build your box is Caltopo. They're not a sponsor, I think, mainly because they're not a big enough company to really be thinking about sponsoring YouTube channels. But Caltopo is a free mapping site. They have feeds that grab a lot of the perimeter data that I use. And then you can turn on things like topographic maps. You can turn on, it's kind of like Google Maps on steroids. You can turn on, the Google satellite-based map. You can turn on shaded relief. It's pretty fun to play with. So I recommend, if you are kind of a land nerd like me, check out Caltopo. But when we look at kind of the opportunities here for building a box off of roads, like there's not many opportunities. And so you either need roads or dozer line to be able to kind of build a box. And so one thing that's handy to do sometimes with a fire like this is let's see, you can just kind of measure. Sorry. Oftentimes I'll just come in here and I'll measure and say, like, if we were going to come all the way down to the roads we saw down here, how big would this fire be? And then it says 169 square miles. It'd be nice if it gave that to me in acres. Well, 640 square miles, 640 acres to a square mile. So if we do the math real quick, 640 times 169, it'd be 100,000 acre fire. So my first guess usually is you look at the road systems and you figure that they're going to box it in and fire off the roads. And not always popular with the ranchers, because the ranchers need grass for their cows. This time of year, there's not green grass, so we're not burning up that kind of feed. But there's often conflict with how operations chiefs think, which is let's get a line around this fire, and the expedient way to do that is to fire off where we have access, versus people who don't want it all burn up. Good news is that this is California, this is fire adapted ecology, and there's nothing out here that is part of nature that's really going to be damaged by even a high severity fire. Anyway, that's the Madre. It'll be interesting to see how big the box gets, but kind of right off the bat, my guess would be 108,000 acres. Okay, so let's go back to NorCal. And we're going to go to the green fire. There's not a lot of structures threatened in Madre, and there's not a lot of structures threatened by any of these big, not big, there's not many structures threatened by the fires currently burning in Northern California anytime soon. I should say there's not major concentrations of people living right near these fires. There's all structures somewhere nearby. Okay, so we're going to start here on the green fire, coming up out of 299 up to Round Mountain, and we're going to get a little kind of deeper into the geography of this spot. So what's interesting about green fire? The green fire is burning off of Fender's Ferry Road in this kind of pretty rugged part of the Shasta Trinity National Forest. So you've got creek here formerly known as Squaw Creek, and I don't right offhand remember the native name, but it's been renamed to the native name. And then you've got the Pitt River here, and the Pitt River is kind of the largest tributary to the Sacramento River watershed. So Pitt River starts all the way up by Lakeview, Oregon. And so one of the things that's going on here with the green fire is green started maybe yesterday, and it was mapped today at 11, and it was about 100 acres. It's kind of been burning actively through the day. There's a couple firestorm crews on it, and there's Diamond Mountain hotshots are out there. my buddy Dan Dobbins. So you know that if Dobbins is out there, um, you know people are there's some smart folks thinking about their tactics here. Um, Really interesting area. This is kind of a research natural area called like Husselkus Devil something, and there's this crazy limestone gorge out here somewhere, and then like just it's really rocky and wild and no roads. And so I think they might be bringing them in on boats. I don't even know, but the crews were hiking in from the bottom. So one of the tricky things here with the green fire could be that, like the Feather River, you've got this huge watershed and these big kind of canyon and night winds, right? So all the cold air that drains kind of out of the northern California, the corner, northeastern California corner, comes down the Pitt River just like it comes down the Feather River. And so there's potential here for strong kind of down canyon winds at night. And so last night you saw the fire burn pretty actively with a north wind on it. And then as the day went on, the winds turned around and the fire has kind of been pushed up more up canyon. So that's super common, but just anytime you've got a major fire by a big river, that's a watch out, is that you can have big kind of runs at night. And at night you don't have your air support. And so they've been hitting it hard all day with retardant, but without, when crews can't get directly engaged with the fire, retardant kind of slows the fire down, but it doesn't stop the fire from the fire can burn through the retardant. So green's got some potential just because of the lack of roads. They're not going to really be able to get bulldozers in there to do much. It's a research natural area. It's super rocky if you look at the ridges and stuff. So it'll be interesting to see what this does. One thing is that if the weather stays mild and the winds aren't high, this fire's already semi-contained, just in that it's between these two arms of Lake Shasta. So basically there's line all the way around it called a lake or the shoreline. Not to say that the fire couldn't spot a quarter mile or whatever it is across the lake, but that is a factor, that it's already surrounded by a lake. So if this gets larger, there would be opportunities for them to like fire off of the edge of the lake. Another thing that's kind of interesting about this fire, if you were following us last year, this is the shoe fire from last year. And during the shoe, we talked about, this idea of letting fires burn in these backcountry areas. I'm going to talk about that all summer because that's, it's got to be part of the conversation. And if they would have let the shoe fire burn out last summer, this wouldn't be an issue, right? If that fire just kind of slowly burned across this landscape, it would have included this. So a friend of mine who lives up here in Podunk Falls, he said that a lot of his neighbors who were really mad at the Forest Service last year for doing firing operations and kind of growing this fire out to natural boundaries are now really happy that they've got a fire around them because they don't have to worry about this fire burning up to their cabins up here. So this landscape that we manage, this landscape of fire, it's always changing. And you put out a fire one year and then the next year, the next fire burns around it. Like just you can't really predict what's going to happen. But as you can see, not a lot of structures out here in general. But you can see Adam's place out there, I betcha. Okay, so green fire. Here's a webcam view. This is from Round Mountain. The last couple hours. So you can see through the day, a bunch of aircraft. There's some helicopters there burning this way. And then you start to see the winds kind of maybe starting to change a little here as the sun's getting low. And we'll see overnight, we'll see the smoke from this going down the canyon. And we'll see if the fire isn't kind of well buttoned up on that down canyon side, you wouldn't be surprised to see it push down, back down this way. So it's probably a bit larger than it was mapped at 11, but still not very big. And like I said earlier, the fact that these fires are not burning the entire drainage in 2 hours tells you that the conditions are pretty mild. We'll talk a little later about live fuel moisture and how that affects these issues, but these areas are covered with brush. And so oftentimes what we see that a fire is going to burn really well on the south-facing slopes where it's getting wind on it. And then maybe, some of this growth on this side might have been from the down canyon wind kind of fanning the fire. So in the shadier aspects, out of the direct sun, where the brush is still fairly green, these fires this time of year, this is why it's frustrating to me when we jump on putting out all these fires as quickly as possible, early-ish in the season, when we're getting good fire effects. Of course, the reasoning is like we don't want this fire to like just punk around under good conditions and then wake up in August and burn up Round Mountain and Montgomery Creek and everything. So it's all complicated, and you know, we'll talk about it all. Okay, so horse fire. Big picture on the horse. It's here between Lake Shasta. I'll turn off. See, there's not a lot of structures out here either. And as I was saying before, a lot of the structures that show up on this structure map are hallucinations because robots it turns out, are not super reliable for recognizing structures for like the entire country. So, all right, so the horse fire is burning here between Lake Shasta and Trinity Lake. And this weird checkerboard pattern we see is what we call the checkerboard ownership. And so if we look at like these purple squares are all private timberland. And if we turn on here, this green is all the car fire. Car fire, and the HERS and Delta fires. So after the car fire, 2018, Sierra Pacific Industries, who owns all this checkerboard, they kind of clear cut all the dead trees on their land. That's what timberland owners, that's their program. They're in the business of growing trees. So if your trees get burnt, you cut them down, you start over. Forest Service, not so in the timber business these days. And so the Forest Service generally hasn't been salvage logging their lands in burns. We could do, you know, multiple documentaries on that topic, but right now we're not gonna. But as far as the checkerboard, why it's there is the Southern Pacific Railroad got built up Highway 5 corridor through Dunsmuir up to Klamath Falls back in the day. And the railroad people got given land in exchange for building a railroad. And so generally when you see like along Highway 80 where the Transcontinental Railroad went through, or Highway 5 where the Southern Pacific went through, this checkerboard is a legacy of the railroad getting all this land given to them and then selling it in big blocks to Louisiana Pacific or Georgia Pacific or other really large timber companies. And so now Sierra Pacific owns a lot of this checkerboard. And if you want to learn more about the checkerboard, check out a video. Just search checkerboard on our YouTube. So anyway, the checkerboard here manifests itself in, you can see the checkers. And this fire happened to start in a section that SPI owns and had just salvage logged since the car fire. So we talked about this yesterday. So you see basically that this fire, which was mapped midday at 275 acres, it had mainly burned in the clear cut. And it kind of started here yesterday and ran. So what we see a lot this time of year, like I said, is alignment of slope that's in the sun with the wind burning uphill, the wind blowing uphill, and the fire gets started and it can kind of make a run. What you also see in here is just that there's a lot of slash. So this got logged, then they left the slash and they sprayed it with herbicide to kill all the plants so they wouldn't compete with their tree seedlings, and they probably planted it. And so now the fire's burned this area. We said yesterday we thought that the fire would probably slow down a bit in the area that hadn't been salvaged just because the brush is pretty green. Today this fire also slopped over Rattlesnake Creek into this north-facing slope, but it hasn't really blown up out of there. So that also tells you that we're basically in a good prescribed fire window, even though it's kind of hot and dry. Like, it would be a great time, as you know, for prescribed fire folks to come in here if the landowner was willing, and we could actually backfire down through here right now and do a lot of good. Potentially help these green trees that survived the car fire survive again. But right now, the private timberland owners aren't keen on that kind of thinking. But the fact that you've got a fire that ran upslope in the middle of the day, they had retardant and stuff, but this fire's not doing a whole lot because seasonally we're not just into that supercritical fuels right now. So that's horse, and been watching horse on the webcams, and here's a kind of current view looking from the south. We'll look at the 6 hours. So the fire's out in here, and you can just see there's not a lot of smoke out of it today. Like those clear cut, the slash fuels burnt down pretty quick. There's a bunch of firefighting going on there, and this fire really hasn't done much through the day. I think what is interesting about this animation is you see like what a dynamic day it has been in Northern California for the weather. Like just check out the action behind Mount Shasta here. It looks like freaking volcanoes going off. All right, so that is the horse fire. Like we said yesterday, we didn't really expect that this fire would do much, that they would have a pretty good wrap on it in 24 hours, and it looks like they have. So that's the horse. Coming over here to the Helena fire. This Helena fire, it's burning on the between the North Fork of the Trinity and what's this creek here? Let's ask Cal Topo. Another nice thing with Cal Topo is that you can, that's a North Fork Trinity, and this is the East Fork of the North Fork. So the Helena fire is burning here. So this is west of Weaverville, just north of 299. Like we've said before on here, lightning fires usually start on top of the slope and then they back their way down, and so as such they don't have the slope kind of mojo to make a run. And that's why oftentimes we get beneficial fire effects out of lightning fires. Is they start on the top of the hill because that's where lightning hits, and they back their way down against the slope. So Helena also is visible on a webcam. This is looking from Hay Fork, and let's look at the last 2 hours. It's interesting, like this doesn't look like what it looked like on the map, so I don't know if I'm seeing the same fire, but I think this is Helena fire. It seems to be pointing up there. Anyway, there was a medical incident on this, and we don't talk much about them, but someone, it sounded like, got heat exhaustion today, and they hoisted him out of there with a helicopter and got him to an ambulance. And all right, just catching your comments. Anyway, so I've been listening to the radio all day, and it's pretty hectic. And you got listening basically to the Reading Dispatch, and you've got a bunch of fires going on. All these fires have an air show, so each of these fires has had an air attack this afternoon, and then and everyone wants Type 1 helicopters because they're very versatile and you can drop the water precisely. But at some point today, they needed a hoist capable helicopter, and the new Cal Fire Firehawk, Blackhawk helicopters have hoists on them. The one on this fire, the hoist would have been taken off so they could do drops or something. And there's another one over here on Green Fire that had a hoist, so they were trying to figure out how to get a hoist. But it reminded me of the Dutch Creek fatality, which happened here in 2008 during the Iron Complex or the Lime Complex. A young Park Service firefighter got hit by a snag and really badly mangled, and he died before they could medevac him. He died during the medevac because it took so long. And so in this country, the smoke packs in. It can be hard to get helicopters in and out. And there's this really complicated shuffling around of resources where, and so things like that can be the reason a fire escapes. If the Green Fire was a little more touch and go today, if they lost their Type 1 helicopter to a medical over here, that could cause this fire to escape. So it's just a reminder that, like the dispatchers have a lot going on, and even when fires aren't really raging and destroying towns and everything else, there's a lot of people that are in harm's way at a time like right now, even with just a bunch of little fires that aren't doing that much. The kind of objective hazards of working in the woods, a lot of them are the same whether you're on a fire that's raging or you're on a fire that's not doing much. Mosquito fire here north by kind of the summit above Coffee Creek on Highway 3. It wasn't doing much today. There's an air attack on it, and a lot of these fires, it takes them a long time to get ground resources because you either have to fly people in or you have to hike them in. So like the green fire's got no road access. The horse fire has good access, but it still took them several hours to start getting resources up into there. And another thing to keep in mind with all these fires that burn in the backcountry is that if we look at our fire history layer here, at what's burned in the last 15 years, there's tons of snags on the landscape. So both a hazard for firefighters in that they can fall on your head, but also it makes it really difficult to make access because these snags have had 10 years to fall down and block all these little roads. And a lot of the roads in these areas just don't get used that much, or they've been water barred and kind of taken out of service. So difficult access. So even though this is not far from I-5, it still took a couple of hours for them to really start have significant ground resources on the horse. So mosquito, don't think it's going to do much. The jacket fire is the one I spotted today, and I thought that it was 50 acres, and it's not. But when we look at kind of our fire history map here, it is burning an area that hasn't had a lot of fire for quite some time, and it's so basically it's just north of Forks of Salmon, and so this area hasn't had a fire since 2008 lightning complex. And this one grew pretty quickly. So when you see a fire that's mid-slope in an area with poor access, oftentimes it tells you it's going to burn for a while, especially in the Clamoth where things are just crazy steep. Like I said, the fact that the fuels aren't crazy drought dry and it's not super hot, that doesn't change the fact that there's no access, and because these fires are really remote, if there is new fires that pop that threaten Grass Valley or Nevada City or other really populated places, these guys aren't going to get the Type 1 helicopters. They're not going to get the big air tankers. So they have mobilized a team today, a federal incident command team, to the Klamath to manage these lightning fires. And really, the reason you bring in a team is for logistics. If you expect stuff to kind of be grinding on for a long time, like you got to feed firefighters, you got to get porta potties, everything else. So they've got a team coming out to manage these fires. Summit is kind of the most active or largest fire that's happening on the Klamath right now, and this one's been burning for 2 days. It's steadily growing. I haven't gotten much of a report on it. This was flowing 8 o'clock. This was flowing about 2 p.m. But you can see that earlier they flew it and there were spot fires out ahead, and then the fire kind of filled into those spots. And so initially this was just a couple acres, and they were trying to get smoke jumpers and hot shots in there to cut a line. But like we said yesterday, this is like crazy steep country. There's tons of snags. There's no road access anywhere nearby. And no one really wants to drop people in here uphill of an active fire in heavy fuels, tall brush, lots of snags, in an area that is like facing down a huge drainage, right? So this is kind of like what we call alignment. And we've learned the hard way that this is sketchy. And so when we talked yesterday about, the idea of letting fires burn in the backcountry, safety is not least of the concerns there. So in a land with 1 million webcams, the Klamath is still pretty webcam free because we got a lot of wilderness and all that. There's another fire over here, the no-name fire that got flown today. This is Syad Valley coming down Highway 96. Important thing about both this fire and the Summit is they're burning in the 2014 Happy Camp Complex, so the frying pan fire. So that just tells you something. It gives you a clue that there's a lot of fuel was reduced by those fires, but a lot of fuel was also created in the form of kind of standing snags. So No Name, it's another, just another mid-slope Clamoth walk-in at the bottom of a steep-ass drainage full of dead material. So another really interesting thing about the Clamoth and these 2014 fires is, when we talk about the consequences of keeping fire out of this landscape forever, you have to kind of couple that with the impacts of decades of high-grade logging. So when I say high-grading, I mean chopping down all the biggest trees. And so this is all public land here. And if we look at kind of where the wilderness is, a lot of the land in the Klamath outside the wilderness was heavily eroded and heavily logged. And they clear cut all the big Doug fir, and then they planted just a huge amount of little baby trees. So if we look back here at our cool Google Earth time machine, come back to like before the fire. See if it'll load up for us. There was a huge amount of plantations out here. Let's see if I got it handy here. Got a lot of data here. Well, if these fires keep going, we'll be loading it up. Here's a stake minute here. So as a geographer, what I've been really interested in is trying to figure out how forest management history affects our current situation, in large part because I think we can do better, and that there's a lot we can learn from the mistakes we've been making. I'm loading up a giant file right now that's outline of all the timber harvest that's happened on Forest Service land in the last century, basically. We'll see if that loads up. All right. But if we look in here at this landscape, going back to 2013, there were just a lot of clear cuts and a lot of plantations, right? So all these areas here got clear cut in the 70s and 80s, or on the mountain here above the No Name fire. And so when you see these kind of even age groups of trees, these roads, they drag logs up to these roads, and that left a lot of, and they planted a ton of trees, but that left these kind of untended tree farms across this really wild landscape. And those burned like crazy in 2014. So when we looked at the kind of fire severity from the 2014 fire, all of those little baby trees, the plantation mortality was crazy high. Like all this stuff here is plantations. So basically the Forest Service invested a huge amount of money replanting these trees, and they said this was a kind of sustained yield forestry. We're going to cut all the old growth, but we're going to plant trees and they're going to grow fast, and we'll only cut as much as we'll regenerate with our timing of planting and our new trees growing. But if you jump forward from kind of 2013 to now 2015 after this fire, you see that these areas that had the baby trees on them just kind of got smoked, and the areas that had bigger trees oftentimes did not. In some places the plantation survived, but in general, some of these areas just got really, really hammered in 2014, including this drainage above where our No Name fire is. So on one hand, there's not a lot of fuel here for this fire, but there is fuel. It's just not you don't have a lot of canopy fuel. Anyhow, that's kind of some big picture look at these fires we've got, and kind of a primer if you're just starting to watch the lookout of the kind of stuff we're going to talk about on here. We're going to talk about forestry. We're going to talk about fire effects. We're going to talk about fire history. You know, if we look at the Clamoth, these are all places that have had fires in the last 100 years. And we talk a lot on here about how that affects the hazard of a new fire getting big. Like, this fire is not going to get big, even if it burns for a long time, because it's burning an area. This area's burned twice since 2008, right next to it. This area's burned in 2014. And what we see is that recent fires are kind of create a self-limiting kind of environment for new fires. All right, so that's the basics. I'm going to do a little bit of kind of looking forward now about what's going on in the big picture. We got this kind of a little bit of a front moving through California today. Like right now in Chico, it's kind of muggy and a little cloudy. And so that's brought up our humidities, which is one reason that these fires up here aren't really going crazy. When we look down here at the last 12 hours on the fire down in Santa Maria, you can see that overnight the marine layer is pushed in. Here's the fire right here. And this is 4 in the morning. And then through the course of the day, that marine layer pulls back to the coast out around Lompoc, Vandenberg. But what that is going to do is, that's one reason I feel like we can say that this fire is not going to like make a big run like out to Santa Maria or anything, just because that marine layer puts out grass fires. Humidities are too high under the marine layer for grass fires to burn at night. It is burning intensely because it's far enough inland that it's kind of beyond that kind of average marine layer influence. So anyway, the forecast here for the next couple of days. For today, there was forecast for some potential lightning in the Modoc Plateau, northeastern California, out in Nevada, and some winds on the coast. We didn't really see winds on our fires today. Tomorrow, still some threat of lightning in the far northeast, and dry, but not no big triggers. We don't have big wind events predicted in these areas we've got current fires. Saturday is supposed to be low risk. There's no lightning, there's no wind, not much wind, and it's not that dry. It's supposed to warm back up, and next week it'll get drier again. But we're still kind of in this little sweet spot where these lightning fires, the burning they do is largely going to be beneficial. They're going to get put out where they're put outable. So where, these fires that don't have good access are going to be difficult. But right now, there's not so much going on that there aren't quite a few resources available. Looking at the weather here, they say there's 15 to 20% chance for mountain thunderstorms through tonight in Shasta County. But this onshore flow will bring cooler below normal temperatures with locally breezy winds for 4th of July. Dry weather is expected Friday, and a slow warming trend continues in the next week. So I think that's about it. I'm going to check out comments here. Someone said crazy dry lightning in Medford. Put outable. Okay. I was going to do one other thing. I was going to look at the radar scope here. This is a radar scope showing from Mount Ashland, basically showing that like this area kind of out east of Wairika got a good bit of rain, and then also there's some pretty heavy rain out towards Alturas. Look at from Reno. Sometimes these things tend to get kind of these big shadows from the mountain ranges that are in their way. So we'll see what you can see from Reno of precipitation. Shows about the same thing. Heavy rain kind of going out through Canby towards Alturas. And this is also where we love these webcams. Like this is up by Hornbrook. So when they say that there's crazy lightning up by Medford, this is looking up towards is that Castle Rock. Siskiyou Summit's right here, and yeah, Medford's got it going on. You can see that the brush is really green, and we've been talking about that with kind of seasonal moisture. Star thistle out here still got quite a bit of green in it. We're talking about live fuel moisture. This is, you can see that same storm system up to the north. This is east of Wairika, and the brush is all really in peak growing season right now. And so it'd be difficult to get a lot of this brush without wind or a fire coming up a sunny side of a mountain. You could go out here right now with a big weed burner, and you wouldn't be able to start a fire in the green foliage of this ceanothus. Maybe the dead sticks down below would burn, but like that's the kind of crazy thing about early July, is that a lot of the brush is like not at all excited about burning, and we only see it burn kind of on the south slope. So that's why that fire burning in a clear cut in dry slash is a thing at all. It's just because live fuel moisture is not an issue there. And then this is just looking kind of towards Mount Shasta, across Shasta Valley, and you can see kind of that there is some rainfall that's happened out there. Earlier there was a lookout standing here, and he was pixelated too. He looked like the Minecraft lookout. All right, so before you leave, check out the Lookout website. We've got some essays on there. We had a recent video about fires in roadless areas. We got some good resources about learning about how to predict when fire season is really going to take off. Talk about some of the burning we've been involved with. This is our archive. We've got a ton of stuff on here. A lot of our longer form stuff. So check it out. If you want to keep the Lookout going, you can become a subscriber, and that's like a huge part of this whole thing working for me right now. Is I got a bunch of folks to give me $5 or $10 a month, and that keeps the Lookout going. And check out our other videos. So thanks again to our sponsors, QTAC, Water Axe, and Firebox, all helping us out, and we appreciate all your support. And we're not going to necessarily do a report every day, but if there's anything kind of that we think is interesting going on, we'll be working on it.